The MLB trade deadline was absolute chaos. I'm here to break down as many of these transactions as I can in a reasonable enough amount of time. The whole goal here is to understand the surplus value on each side of the transaction. For example, you're looking at Adley Rutschman here. What is he actually worth from a dollar perspective, factoring in his salary, projected WAR, a qualifying offer attached to him, which may go away with the CBA, where we're going to kind of remove that from the calculus. We come up with a number. We compare that number to the value of the prospects or the players going on the other side of the transaction. To do that, we're using FanGraphs valuation tiers, very similar to stuff I've done in other videos where I tried to project out Tarik Skubal's packages and some other stuff too. This one off the top is a fun one to talk about because I have this as a gargantuan overpay. $64 million overpay is crazy. Now, I am again deferring to FanGraphs valuation tiers here, and part of the reason why that is big is because FanGraphs really likes Eyanson and Eyanson here, and that is going to juice up the value. $90 million on those two players. I'm going to take a wild guess and say the Red Sox internally do not have the same valuations on those guys. Maybe the Orioles do. The big thing to point out here, though, is that I was on fail territory and I was asked about this and quickly shot some text around. Someone from the front office texted me back and said, basically, he thought Eyanson and Witherspoon were damaged goods. Now, this gets clipped on fail territory, goes pretty viral, and yeah, I kind of looked like an idiot. I was getting eviscerated in the comments. And the big thing I'll point out is that I don't think the individual I was talking to is saying these guys are presently injured. I realized after I said that on air that, yeah, it very much was implying he thought they were injured. They're not injured prospects, but I'm not going to add context in a foul territory thread, which is going to get shredded. So I give the context to you here. What I think this individual is getting at, and is the crux of this transaction, is that the industry, to me, is not particularly keen on either Eyanson or Witherspoon, which is a deviation from the public perception of these two talents, especially on Eyanson in regards to FanGraphs making him basically a top 35 pitcher in baseball projected. That is really aggressive. There's a lot of people that think Eyanson is basically a reliever. Maybe it's some kind of leverage reliever, but very much not like a 55 future value type. There's also others that don't think Kyson Witherspoon is really much of anything. Now, I would say I got another conversation with someone from a front office that very rationally talked me through it all and was like, listen, I think that person was correct in saying the damaged goods, which does not mean injured, just means overvalued in the public space, was correct, but you take shots on those guys, and then you also add in an interesting bat that's far away and a major league catcher, Narvaez, and you have what is probably the Red Sox leaking value in this transaction. Is it $64 million worth of value? I don't think so. I don't really think anybody thinks so, but it's probably a lot. Let's say you have Eyanson more as like a 45 plus, which is probably a very good reliever. You could cut this transaction in half from an overpay standpoint. I am factoring in some postseason stuff down here. It's not perfect science. I'm basically saying Adley Rutschman's worth maybe like $2 to $3 million worth to the Red Sox based on their playoff projection this given season. Is that low? Is that high? Totally up for debate. I'm making an attempt. I'll link to this whole sheet in the description of this video as well if you want to kind of check out how I'm calculating some of these elements. That's the Adley Rutschman transaction in a nutshell. And I hope it makes more sense than just seeing one thing that was clipped on foul territory and thinking I'm an idiot, which is totally fair to do. But again, I'm a rational idiot. Let's put it that way, maybe for the most part. Eyanson, Witherspoon, kind of interesting arms. The reason I think people don't like him, here's Eyanson. I think the reason he's a 50 future value type is because he absolutely mashes the ball. Fun arm, but very far away. On the Witherspoon side, both of these guys are kind of limited in what they could do with spin, and they have kind of like higher slots. My stuff model really does not like Kyson Witherspoon. It's an interesting fastball shape. It's really stock release stuff. He throws hard. He sits 95. There's average strikes, average miss. He was a first round arm. He's probably not tracking as a first round arm. Now, Eyanson had pretty incredible results early in the year. Some people from another third organization told me that he thought the Red Sox did a very good job in kind of inflating his velocity early in the season by not really stretching him that deep from a pitch count standpoint. And he's 93 now. He was more like 91, 2 in college. He's 93. He came out. People say he's up to 100 in the breakout game, and he kind of catches a lot of steam. Shapes are very, very limited here. He can't spin the ball at all. It's a really high slot. It's fastball, slider, splitter. There's a cutter in there and a curveball, all in a perfectly vertical line. He has no ability to create glove side shapes. The high release is going to cause the stuff to play down. So I understand the critiques of this being a more rational way to approach this transaction. You can even drop maybe Witherspoon down to like 40. It's only going to shave off a couple $1 million. But it appears to be an overpay. I think it's more of a quantity overpay than like, oh my God, they got massive pieces in this deal. I hope that makes sense. I'm curious in your thoughts as well. Hop into the comments and let me know, because I'll be hanging around in there and getting thoughts on this matter. Fun trade, crazy trade. I think it's the most interesting trade, I would say, because 4 names being moved is pretty big. The Cubs made a bunch of moves, and obviously I work for Marquee Sports Network, so Am I partially biased here? Perhaps, but I'm going to try to be as rational as possible by, of course, bringing things down to the numbers. I think they had a pretty strong deadline. I'm going to walk through all their transactions right here. The first one, Kevin Gausman. I thought this was an absolute steal. I don't really think Celticine or Bateman are major league impact guys of any type. My calculations have it as a direct underpay, which is a little bit surprising to me. I know Gausman's walk rate has kind of jumped up in July particularly, but he's a great pitcher. He pitched really well in the World Series last year. It's a very simple approach. Forcing him over the middle of the plate, split change thing that has influenced a lot of pitchers in Major League Baseball down in the zone. A pretty good pitch. I have it as an underpay. So I think that's a pretty fantastic transaction for Jed Hoyer. The Clay Holmes one perplexed me because I don't see a dramatic difference between the value of Clay Holmes and Gausman on both our rentals. Holmes has a player option for the subsequent season. I'm assuming that is not picked up and he goes on a multi-year contract. I hope I'm remembering that correctly. Now, the thing here that's fascinating to me is they give up Jefferson Rojas, who's kind of a pretty good prospect. He's completely blocked in that organization. I mean, he's got really good data. He chases a bit. Maybe that's a bit of a concern in the profile, but the batted ball quality looks really good and he doesn't miss. So you're kind of just corralling him, forcing him to swing at strikes in the zone. And yeah, I'm a little surprised here because if he's a 50 future value type, this is a dramatic overpay. I didn't bring in the value of Tyrone Taylor. Spoke to someone in the front office who told me that that's the kind of name thrown into a deal that doesn't appear to have any value, but when teams are projecting out their win probabilities in the playoffs, something like Tyrone Taylor, who could be pinch hit in really big spots to face a left-handed reliever, think of like Tanner Scott or Mason Montgomery. I'm just trying to randomly throw out lefty relievers. He provides like win probability added, championship win probability added beyond him just being kind of the name he is right now. So even if that pushes it up like $5 million though, it's still an overpay. Like even if you're not going to value Tyrone Taylor at $10 million in surplus through the end of the season. So I think this is an overpay. It's an interesting one. Maybe they have some inroads on extending Clay Holmes. I was just surprised that Jefferson Rojas was a return for the Mets. I think that's, again, sneaky, one of the better prospects traded at the deadline here. They also go after Ryan Zeferjahn, who's a reliever, who's pretty interesting to kind of model. I'd never modeled out like 5 years of control on a reliever. It's really difficult to do. I'm giving a lot of grace here to the Cubs from a WAR standpoint that he gets up to the point where he's pretty valuable. I'm projecting that like 1 WAR a year, which I think is way over what like Zips and other places have. Even if you do that, it's a slight overpay. Moises Ballesteros, tough one. He doesn't really have a defensive position. He can absolutely hit. Mason McGuire, kind of like a 40 future value type fun fastball, is pretty limited from a spin capacity standpoint. So I think this is an overpay as well. Again, if you really think if you think control on a reliever like Zeferjahn, and you also think you can get the walk rate down, he's been at like 14% in his career, then I could see this being like not as crazy of an overpay. I say strong deadline, even though these are 2 overpays, because they went for it. Like they actually made moves to progress and try to actualize some of the playoff probabilities they have. Now, they're going to have to get out of a 3-game set. There's a ton of variance in that situation, but they probably go in with like a 60-ish% win percentage in that series. And I think that that's really what they're playing for. The sneaky steal, I think, of this entire deadline is Braxton Garrett. Couple orgs I spoke with liked him a lot and were trying to get him actually. I'm not going to mention the organizations, but the Cubs ended up landing him for 2 guys that I don't necessarily think appropriately fit the value you would have on Braxton Garrett. He missed 24 TJ. He's looked awful this season. Probably some kind of recovery stuff going on. And Zips has him projected for like 1.4, 1.5, 1.6 WAR in that window over the next 2 seasons. He's also really cheap. Like he's not going to make more than a couple mil, depending on ARB structure and how the CBA affects that. I'm kind of throwing that out for the purposes of this video on the sake of simplicity. They give up Jonathan Longs, a right first baseman. Cubs have no need for. Jay Speck's kind of an interesting AAA reliever who maybe is a big dude, kind of throws hard. Is interesting. But I mean, those guys don't value out a lot at all. So I don't like this transaction for the Marlins much. I think this was kind of a sneaky steal for the Cubs. So props to them in this. I just think it was the proper mix, right? If they stopped at Gausman, didn't get Clay Holmes, I still think this would have been a decent kind of haul for them, but they go after Holmes. They get Tyrone Taylor on top of that. Shout out to the Cubs for going after it. I feel like in the past, they haven't really done that. Sneaky deadline I liked. I think I've said sneaky like 20 times in this video already. The Giants, I think, did a pretty good job here. I like what they did, and I especially like it because I think the Phillies overpaid a lot for Luis Arraez and Caleb Killian. I don't necessarily understand Arraez's fit on the Phillies. I don't think that's much of a need for them, Caleb Killian feels like a flash in the pan to me. He's another reliever you kind of have to project out. I'm projecting him somewhat similar to Zeferjahn, where it's like, cool, like there's some value there, but I don't know. Like he struggled for most of his career. Shout out to the Giants for getting the development right on him and pushing him to be like a serviceable leverage guy this season, but I'm not buying it as like a leverage option long term. Maybe the Phillies are, like clearly are. They give up a Ramon Marquez though, who is a really interesting pitcher to me. He's one that I was late on. There's other people in the industry who were ahead on me on him. You'd call him like a super pronator. This is everything's moving to the arm side here. You can see the slider, you have the four seam. This changeup though, baby. Oh boy, this thing destroys hitter. This thing's had like a 60% zone miss rate. It draws a ton of chase. And the key thing I really like is despite the fact the slider has a bit of arm side, it's sitting 89 miles per hour. He's got command, there are strikes. This is a guy that literally you could take and put in the majors tomorrow. I actually think he would give you like a pretty good outing. The only hesitation here, and I know it's a high pitcher and you're like, how on earth is that possible? The only hesitation is just his workload. He doesn't have like 120 innings under his belt in a given season. He's just got to build that. But this is like a super high probability major league starter. And Dombrowski trades from this occasionally. It's just kind of is what it is. And, you know, he does this. I don't think it's a good trade for the Phillies. And we'll see. I could be wrong, but I love this for the Giants from a rebuild standpoint. It's the proper kind of move to make. They also trade off Robbie Ray and get Miguel Mendez, who is a name that I'm kind of intrigued by. He's another guy that I kind of think is like a high probability in a way. Similar, again, idea here to what we were talking about with Marquez, where everything is a bit kind of skewed to the arm side. But similar concept, decent slider. There's a decent changeup in here too. The release traits are a bit more interesting. He's since 97. So even if you project this more as a reliever, I do think there's 3, maybe 4 shapes in here as he develops the curve. And he becomes kind of interesting. He's more in that 45-ish future value tier, which equates to, what do I have that as? Or FanGraphs has that as. You got a top 115-ish pitcher. You're hoping he's a reliever. He gets to like 1, a little bit over 1 WAR for that to work from a transaction standpoint. Robbie Ray's, you know, he's been decent of late. He started throwing a sinker to right-handed hitters. Helio Ramos for Henry Lalane, too, is an interesting one. Lalane kind of caught a ton of steam because he's got pretty wicked stuff. He's a huge dude. He was kind of dominating in high A. My stuff model doesn't love him, but it's interesting release traits. He's a big dude, really high arm angle, massive extension, resulting in a really high release height, generated a ton of zone miss. He used to have, I think, higher velo. I believe he had surgery, arm surgery of some kind. Now he's like 94-ish. So really interesting arm again. I just think they rebuilt really nicely here from the names they got back. I know it's 3 arms. They got Jackson Flora in the draft as well. I think they appropriately nailed some of these. Maybe you could argue the Yankees underpaid here, so to speak, for Helio Ramos, who has multiple years of control on him and such. But I like this overall for the Giants from a package standpoint. I also really like Jose Soriano going to the Angels. This one to me, I thought was pretty fair on both sides. I heard some people say they don't like it because he can't give up Namala, but 2 years of control on a guy projected for mid-2s in WAR. And I also see development actions with Soriano. I think this is solid. Let's look at Namala first. He absolutely torches the ball. And I think that's a pretty big thing. So you're to 25 here to 26. Look at that jump just in contact quality. He also got better from a discipline standpoint. The big one is that he's jumped up like the 99th percentile and 90th EV. I got him up at like 108. Some of that contact's on the ground, as you can see right here, but it's not like all on the ground. So he's got legitimate juice, hits the ball incredibly hard. And I also will show you, I want to take a peek and I'll actually show you kind of how I walk through and analyze pitchers sometimes. So this is kind of like a personal tool I built. I'm not going to link to this in the video description just because it's a personal thing and there's some errors in it too, so I don't want to give it out to the public and then have people kind of mess up with it and stuff. But the thing I'll point out, I want to look at Jose Soriano because Mike Maddox is a guy who loves throwing four-seam fastballs. And it makes sense. If you look at pre-2 strike, what you could see is that he grabs a ton of called strikes on the four-seam fastball, which is good, right? Like, that's fine. The problem for me is when he goes to 2 strikes, he still throws this thing 23% of the time overall, 27% to lefties, about 20% to righties. It just does not have nearly the same amount of miss as other things in his mix. I don't understand why he's throwing it. 2-strike barrel rate of 14%. It allows a lot of fly balls. His locations, I'm going to assume, are super in the zone as well as you go to 2 strikes, let's see. Yeah, like down away, he's trying to grab called strikes 2K. You know, elevating decently there against lefties, but I'm just not the biggest fan of this pitch. But for the most part, Mike Maddox does it with a lot of his pitchers. He uses four-seam fastballs deep in counts. I don't really understand it. I think it's pretty easy to assume that kind of deteriorates in the Blue Jays organization, and the Blue Jays make him a better pitcher. So I like this on both sides. Angels get a really good prospect immediately. They're number 1. Blue Jays get control of a very good pitcher that I think they can make better. The Cardinals also made some interesting moves. They got 2 guys who hit the ball incredibly hard. So Alexander Frias per FanGraphs is rated as like a 50 future value type. So they have this as a gargantuan overpay again, especially for Dustin May and Jojo Ramiro. Frias hits the ball hard. Ragsdale's data was really impressive when I looked at it as well. Just one of those names you just don't really know. He's a AA guy and he looks great. He's got balls over 110. 90th EVs, way up there, 75th percentile solid. Mix that with the discipline he has as a hitter. It's a pretty interesting name for the Cardinals to pick up. And it's interesting to me how much they have deviated from the old approach of the prior regime of going after more contact-oriented types. If you go back like 2 years on this channel, maybe even a year, I talked about how the Cardinals from a hitting standpoint love contact-first hitters, contact over pop, and just never added the bat speed and didn't really do a good job of developing hitters. They're flipping that now. They're going after two guys who scorch the ball. Frias is another one who just torches the ball, right? Really strong. He needs a lot of lift stuff. He's a really young dude. A lot of the guys coming over from the complex and stuff have chase problems and are very aggressive and are on the ground too much. But the raw tools there, I think, are pretty interesting, and FanGraphs clearly really likes him. So that trade, I thought the Cardinals did good on. You can maybe argue they should have gotten more for Lars Nootbaar. Egan is kind of an interesting name, but I don't think he's anything more than like a 5 in a rotation. Sandro Santana is kind of interesting too. But again, I think for the surplus that Nootbaar has in an extra season, maybe the market just didn't really value him that highly. But I think they had an interesting deadline. I really like this package. The Brewers were obviously in the Skubal stuff, didn't actually get to the point of converting that transaction. You could also go and look at 2 rental starters. And yeah, this is pretty decent value here. I like how these both line up mostly from like a future value standpoint. There's slight overpays when you adjust for the postseason. I think anything like sub 10 mil overpay is totally acceptable, and probably when you look at a team model internally nets out to be 0 or even advantage to the team acquiring the player. Cash Mayfield for Casey Mize, you're going to maybe critique Preller here because Mayfield's interesting. He's not my flavor of pitcher that I love. He has had great results at high A. There's a bunch of zone miss. It's kind of like an interesting big extension, low release lefty, but he doesn't really have any slider feel or breaking ball feel in my opinion. The changeup's really solid. He doesn't throw hard. He sits like 91. He's been up to 96. But this is definitely like a velocity play, I would say, long term. For the Tigers in this respect, it's a good arm to get for Casey Mize, especially if you're not going to extend him and such. But I'm surprised that Preller gave up Mayfield for 2 months of Casey Mize when the Padres have like a 28% chance of getting into the playoffs. So that's a little confusing to me as why they do this like weird soft buy on Casey Mize. Like maybe, they have like no farm system now. On top of removing Cash Mayfield, they have Schoolcraft and a couple other guys and such, but like he was the more interesting name in that sense, and I think that that's one of the key things that might be difficult to rationalize as a Padres fan is how exactly you go in that direction and like that piece being given up. Freddy Peralta is another one that's interesting from the Rays perspective of they are a team that throws a bunch of right changeups. So they're number 1 in baseball this season on right changeups at 14%. You could see that this is a giant leap over the last couple seasons. Think of guys like Brian Baker they've acquired, Nick Martinez that they've acquired. Also, I think this kind of applies to Freddy Peralta. He's a guy who's had some right-handed hitter problems this season. We can jump and take a peek at him quickly. It's not like dramatic in terms of what he's run into from a damage standpoint and such, but like 10% K- walk, which is way down from the prior season as well. I'll pop that up and show you. It's like 24%, I think, K- walk to righties last year. Let's see what it was. Yeah, 25%. He's cut the barrels, but he's not missing nearly as many bats. 15% swinging strikes down to 11% this season. And I think that the Rays maybe just look at him and go, hey, we like changeups. We're throwing a lot of right changeups. Why not jam that forward? And I think that could be the strategy by the Rays here. So again, I have this as a slight overpay, but I think it's a very correct overpay by the Rays in the situation they're in as a team to go after a guy like this. Gary Gill-Hill, it's kind of an interesting name. I'll pop him up just to show. He throws a bunch of pitches in the zone, but he generates like 0 zone miss, which you can see right here. So yeah, I think a 61% zone rate is astronomical, 99th percentile. There may not be a pitcher in minor league baseball who's in the zone as much as he is, which is really impressive. Are the Mets valuing that trait? Perhaps they are. That's an interesting way, perhaps, to look at things. We could also take a look at Luke Weaver, year of control on a reliever. That rhymed. And he's I got him at like a small surplus of 9 mil. Tough projection here for next season. Relievers are tough to get over 1 WAR. So this is an underpay. Sammy Stafura is a name that this doesn't sound like FanGraphs likes too much. Perhaps this is one of those things where the organization acquiring him views it as more of a 45, and then the Mets are looking at this as a slight overpay, and the Pirates are looking at it as an underpay, which is honestly probably how transactions happen a lot of the time. I thought Weaver would return a lot more. Perhaps I thought he would be connected to a Clay Holmes, where you kind of move the contract, get a bigger prospect and such, even though it's not that big of a contract. But Weaver's kind of interesting. I think this was a fun move by the Pirates overall. It's just tough to model out the impact of relievers. I talked about this in prior videos, Ben Clemens as well. We always see reliever overpays at the deadline. It's generally because teams play more incrementally as they jump up in like championship win probability and such that it doesn't seem like too much of an overpay for organizations internally as they try to calculate out how they're winning games and pitching deep into games. Two more transactions we'll hop through. The Luis Garcia one's kind of interesting. A lot of names given up by the Yankees here. This is a pretty even value trade, though. I'm actually juicing up Ben Grable slightly, and even Jack Serbert. We'll go with Serbert as well. And I'm interested in Grable, particularly because FanGraphs does not like him at all, and I think it's because of how gross kind of the arm action is. But his fastball is like unbelievably fun. This thing is weird. It's a high arm angle, but he cuts it up at like 21 inches of vert, and it sits 96. There's not a lot of pitch shapes in baseball that line up with that. He got a bunch of zone misses you could see right here as well. Maybe the Nationals have some tolerance to start him, which would be really fun. Yovani Cruz throws like 99, gets up to 102. Jake Bird's been around the majors a little. And Serbert is like this kind of interesting arm, who I think maybe lands in some kind of major league projected role. Maybe it's more transactional from like a up-down guy, but he's got like these fun lift sweepers. He sits 93, more of a velo play, fun release traits, 5-5 release there. And we'll cap things off with Skubal, who I talked about I almost ad nauseum on this channel just because it was such a big transaction that we knew was going to happen at some point, and I'll just recap it right here. I have this as a giant overpay, but again, as you model this out, it cuts down a ton from the Dodgers, and I might even be wrong in saying he's worth $18 million to the Dodgers, just because they're going to be so probable to get and use him into the championship series and elsewhere that he becomes like incredibly valuable. And I wonder whether this number is like this 17 million I have, which is basically doubling his surplus to the Dodgers, is just not even close. Maybe it's up at 40-50 million in it. They rationalize it or still overpay by 20 million. It doesn't really matter to them in that respect. So Zahir Hope, River Ryan, and Brady Smith. People crapping on River Ryan because he's old. I get it, but if you get 3 to 4 years, even 2 to 3 years out of him, it's fine. I understand the body kind of starts to break down at that age, but he's sick. Like, his shapes are unbelievable. There's like, if you're building a pitching prospect, this is like exactly what I would do. Like, I would just duplicate River Ryan. Awesome release traits. He's below average release. He throws really hard. He has velocity on his breaking balls. He throws a slider and a cutter and his curveball. Sick 2-strike pitch and deep count pitch. He's a fun sinker. He's a changeup as well. He throws strikes. He gets miss. There's literally no critiques here apart from the fact that he's turning 28 in like 2 weeks. And I don't know if that's a reason to fade it. You know, if I'm the Tigers and I get 2-3 years out of him, I think I'm content, especially if I knew I wasn't coming to the table to transact on Skubal. Zahir Hope, I've mentioned on other videos. He's a guy who lifts the ball a ton. He changed some things year over year. If you look at 25 there to 26, he got a lot better on the swing miss side of things. It's just that he started chasing more to do it, so I'm not convinced there's too much of like a skill gain there for him. But yeah, scorches the ball, hits it in the air. Easy guy to project for like 240, 25 to 30 homers, which is absolutely going to play on a Tigers team that maybe could add another bat and be interesting alongside McGonigal and Clark and some of the others. Fun video. Hope this makes sense. And as always, thanks for watching the channel. Check out my Substack if you haven't already or not a sub. Got a lot more stuff throughout the end of the season into next year. And a lot of cool stuff in the archives you could hop through as well. Top 100 pitchers, top 50 pitching prospects, a bunch of thought on player development and pitching development specifically. So check that out if you haven't. I'll link to it in the video description. I'll see you guys soon.